Good morning, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Improving Government Performance, a conversation with Scott Harra. We'll be talking about ways to increase transparency, accountability, decision-making, and performance outcomes through the use of data. My name is Aaron Howard, and I'll be your moderator today. I'm the President and Chief Technology Officer of Mass Ingenuity. We specialize in state government performance. Mass Ingenuity is honored to have worked with over 80 agencies in many domains, including corrections, public health, human services, and a host of others. I am pleased that Scott is joining us to talk about the important topic of improving government performance, a subject that I know is very near and dear to the mission you are all devoted to every day. Welcome, Scott. Please take a moment to introduce yourself before we dive into our topics for the day.
Well, thank you, Aaron, and it's good to see everybody. I'm named Scott Harra, and I spent 30 years in state government in the state of Oregon. The first part of that, first 18 years, was at the Oregon Budget and Management Division and the Oregon Department of Consumer and Business Services, which is the state's largest regulatory agency. And then after 18 years in state government, Governor Kulongoski asked me to take over the Oregon Department of Administrative Services. I was the 5th director that he appointed in his first 5 years in office, and so it was a bit of a challenge, and that is where I first encountered the concept of enterprise performance management. And I spent the rest of the governor's term at the Oregon Department of Administrative Services, and then went back to the Department of Consumer and Business Services, where I was the agency director there for a period of time before ending my career working for State Treasurer Ted Wheeler in the Office of State Treasury in Oregon.
Thank you, Scott. On behalf of everybody who has known you for so many years, it's good to see you again.
Thank you.
This dialogue is going to dive into how government effectiveness has a profound impact on citizens and residents. We'd like to encourage questions from the audience during the conversation, and at the end, time permitting, we'll answer them live. Otherwise, of course, we'll answer them and send them to you. Please utilize the question functionality and go to Webinar Control Panel if at all possible. So our first topic area has to do with the inherent challenges leaders encounter in accomplishing their agency's mission and community well-being. We all know that state government leaders and employees are deeply committed to their roles and their mission. As a result, they make sacrifices every day. We see it every day. Yet they face numerous challenges accomplishing those missions to improve community well-being and accomplish what they said they would do. So Scott, what are some examples of the inherent challenges that leaders and employees face in accomplishing their mission and the ability to improve community well-being?
Well, I remember very early on in my career, one of my very first mentors in state government was Fred Miller, who was the head of the executive department, and he made it really clear to us that government is under a microscope, both from the media and from the legislature. And as such, the culture that develops around that is one of risk aversion. And so there's a big resistance to change. And when you're talking about implementing something like enterprise performance management, there's a great deal of resistance because this isn't how we've been doing it for the last 20 years. And so that is one of the biggest challenges just inherently that you face in state government. And then beyond that, with the current hybrid model of the workplace, where many people maybe come into the office once, twice, maybe 3 times a month, or less often, depending, it gets really hard to build that cohesion of the organization and to do effective change management in that type of situation. So it makes it doubly hard these days, where you have so many people working either in the office or at home, to get that sense of community and sense of pulling together for change.
Indeed. Before we move on to the next topic, let's stay on this one for a moment. Scott, could you just talk briefly about how you found, what ways you found to introduce the concepts of change management into the organization in a way that was effectively understood so people could get on with it? Just take a moment for that, please.
Well, there was constant messaging was a big part of that. So there was messaging coming out of my office on a weekly basis, but also more importantly to me is we had a series of town halls where our leadership team met with every work unit in the organization to talk about how important it is to make this change, why we're making this change, what the cause or the burning platform was for us to move forward in this regard. And people got excited about it. And I often talk about that you can't delegate leadership. You know, your staff wants to see and hear from you as the agency head talking about these things. They want to make sure that you are committed before they're going to be willing to commit themselves. And so for a lot of the agency leaders that I talk to, is you have to roll up your sleeves and be involved in this at the ground level with your team so that they buy in and they follow you.
Thank you, Scott. Great advice. Let's move on to the next topic, which has to do with the transformative role of data in elevating an agency's performance as well as the people's quality of life in general. Fortunately, there's an ever-increasing emphasis on using data more effectively to achieve state government transparency, accountability, decisions, and performance. At the same time, many state agencies are running to catch up to fully integrate people, process, and technology. So question, Scott, is how do you perceive the need for data tools and capabilities such that you can actually effectively elevate an agency's performance while fulfilling the mission? And please share some examples of that. It's one of the areas that's the largest challenge, even though it seems like it should be straightforward.
Yeah, and again, back to that risk aversion, there's also often a culture of fear around data because data has been used to punish rather than to solve problems. You know, and I would tell the staff that, you know, we can't fix a problem if we don't know it exists, and we can't really fix the problem if we don't have the data to understand what the problem is. And so setting that framework of this is about problem solving and how are we going to work together to solve problems and allocate our very finite resources across the agency to fix the most important pain points so that we can move forward. And, you know, there was a lot of work that we had to do behind the scenes, quite frankly. For example, when I presented in front of Ways and Means, the first time I presented our scorecard, and I told the members of Ways and Means before the public hearing, there's going to be a lot of red on that scorecard because we all know that this agency isn't performing at the level that we all believe it should be, and that in order to improve, we have to admit that we have problems that need to be fixed. Now, if you all grandstand during that Ways and Means hearing and beat up the agency terribly, I can guarantee you the next time I come back, all those metrics will be green. And I said, that's not going to solve any problems. If you want us to really solve the problems and improve the agency, you have to give us clearance. And so a number of the members of Ways and Means asked me, well, how can we help? And I said, that's exactly what we need to do during committee. I want you to ask me how you can help. And I'm not going to ask for your help. I promise you that. But if you ask, that message gets sent back to the agency in a very, very strong and powerful way. And that was really the turning point where people said, we're not going to get beat up every time we say things aren't going well. It's actually, they're going to help us solve these problems if we need more resources. And so that was a big turning point for us. And an even better example is, as you know, one of the pain points in the agency is prior to my coming over to the Department of Administrative Services, we stood up a statewide data center, and that combined the 12 largest data centers in the state of Oregon into a single entity. And quite frankly, the change management involved in that was not well performed. There was a lot of angst and dissatisfaction. I would say that there were some promises made that weren't kept. And so one of the areas that we really were working on developing a good customer relationship was the use of the data center. And pretty soon we were able to, when agencies would complain about the data center, we'd be able to show data. Well, we're actually up 99.997% of the time. So what other issues do you have going on, maybe with the coding of your software or whatever? So it's not a data center issue. Fast forward though, after the data center had been around for a number of years and some of our infrastructure was starting to age. And that started causing outages at agencies because the network was coming down. Now, prior to that, when the network would go down, it was usually Batco Bob had cut a fiber someplace in the network, and we'd have to reroute things and things would come back up. But now we were having switches starting to fail. And to show how things had changed from before, where the data center was everybody's favorite whipping child, to I had actually left the Department of Administrative Services, but I co-presented representing the customers of the data center with the new director of the Department of Administrative Services. And we asked for $40 million to upgrade the infrastructure in the state of Oregon. And it passed unanimously because we had the data, we had the support of the customers, and a great presentation by the agency itself on the need for that infrastructure update. So using data really helped move us forward in the conversations, and it wasn't he said, she said anymore. That answer your question there, Aaron, or is that?
Absolutely, and I love the fact that embedded in the solution and the answers is storytelling. Using data actually to make a point that people can relate to, decision makers can relate to. I think that just cut through the entire, the entire piece of it. We're going to move on to a related topic, which is best practices for empowering agencies to operate effectively, and especially to remain human-centric as they do that. Every state agency strives to improve their operational and strategic effectiveness while maintaining a human-centric approach, even in today's hybrid environment. So the question is this, Scott, in your experience, what best practices and tools have proven effective in empowering agencies to operate effectively? And what do you recommend these agencies do more of and less of in order to apply those practices?
Well, it's implementing those, and we're going to talk about, I think, a little bit later on, what is enterprise performance management, and I really think that simply enterprise performance management takes a very complex system and makes it understandable for everybody. More importantly for me is it creates clear goals and outcomes and ways to measure whether you're being successful or not. And one of the challenges that we have is, as I mentioned before, we have finite resources in state government, so we can't fix everything that we'd like to fix, but it provides a tool for us to allocate those resources to the highest pain points so that we're fixing the most important things first, and then moving on after those get fixed to the secondary and tertiary items that need to be fixed. And so, using performance management as a resource allocation tool, I think is very powerful for decision makers and executive teams and state agencies.
I have a corollary question to this. How does this relate to the classic model of people, process, and technology? Because I'm getting a sense that it's about balancing those. What are your thoughts?
Well, absolutely, because when we do enterprise performance management, we talk about the fundamentals map, which is a processed view of the organization. It's not an organizational structure view of the organization, and that's what we're really focused on. Are what are the processes in the organization, and how do we know that they're healthy? And then on the people side, do our employees see themselves in those processes? Do they see where they fit in the organization and how they contribute to the outcomes of the organization? And then, quite frankly, there's a lot of information and data out there, and if you don't have the right data tools in place, then it makes it hard to continuously track that. And so having an enterprise SaaS system in place for me really was beneficial, because number one, everybody can see where the whole organization is. You can report out on it very quickly. You can answer questions from the legislature or from the press very quickly on how you're doing on one subject or another. And as time progresses and people can see that the work that they're doing every day is actually making a difference, that's very powerful for employees of an organization. Indeed.
Thank you very much for that. Well, you defined EPM earlier. Let's talk about investing in EPM. In order to improve government performance, our state government clients are making significant investments in enterprise performance management. Scott, I know you are a proponent of EPM. So first, please describe it again, maybe just from the standpoint of investment. And secondly, how does that actually help transform what we're talking about, which is essentially transforming the agency, transforming lives, transforming service that we deliver?
So one of the things I love, and I mentioned this already, is that it's on a single piece of paper, it takes a process view of an organization. And I don't care how big, large, and complex it is. there's a way to break it down to 7 or 8 core processes that every organization performs. And what that did for me and my personal experience with the Department of Administrative Services is it tore down the silos that were in my organization. And I used to complain as a customer of the agency before I became the director that the agency would send me 3 different risk management surveys to do. One would come from IT, one would come from HR, and then one would come from our actual risk management division at the Department of Administrative Services. And so there was no cohesion across the agency on the subject of managing risk. And then when one of our core processes became managing the state's risk, all of a sudden across the organization, they started working together, and a single risk management survey would go out each year that all the agency used, because pretty soon people realized, well, there's HR risk, there's financial risk, there's property risk, there's cybersecurity risk, and everybody now saw that they had a role in risk management within the organization, even though probably nowhere in their position description did it describe risk management, but they all understood very quickly that they had a role in that. I don't know if I answered your whole question.
No, you did. Thank you for that. We're going to dive a little deeper now into sort of, okay, if we're going to make an investment, how do we make sure we deal with the challenges? So there are challenges in implementing EPM, and you've already alluded to some of them. As with any transformative, activity, whether it be strategic or operational, it comes with the benefits and it comes with the challenges. And unfortunately, sometimes the challenges are offered up as reasons for not doing something. But of course, we need to do something. So from your point of view, what is the greatest challenge agencies face when they're implementing EPM? And how do you recommend they address the challenges? And would you please include communities of practice and how that can be an effective way across agencies as part of that? Because I think what we're really going to do here is show that there's always a good time to start. And in fact, you're going to get a benefit that outweighs the challenges.
Yeah. So one of the biggest challenges is the culture of an organization. And again, we talked about that earlier, that risk aversion culture in an organization, the resistance to change. And quite frankly, a lot of organizations resist implementing change management practices, but I really see that as an opportunity, because if people look at their employee surveys that they do each year, one of the biggest complaints is lack of communication. Well, what was one of the core fundamentals of change management? It's consistent communication about what the organization's doing, why they're doing it, and how they're progressing on that initiative. So I would turn that challenge around to as it's really an opportunity. The other item challenge that I hear usually from the executive team, it's not from the staff, it's from the executive team. We have too many things going on. We're too busy. We got to deal with this crisis. We got to deal with that crisis. And my honest answer is, if you invest the time up front, a lot of those challenges, those crises, they go away because you're better able to anticipate them. And you also stop focusing on things that really don't matter, because it becomes crystal clear what is important and where you as an executive should be spending your time. And a lot of the stuff that you're doing right now isn't moving the needle, and you shouldn't be doing it. So those are my two, counters to challenges that I often hear is, the culture, and then we're just too busy. And we're never too busy. If you just invest the time up front, you're going to have more time than you ever had before.
Indeed, indeed. A lot of investment goes into things like lean or quality improvement in general. Oftentimes, agencies will make their individual investments. Sometimes they compare notes, sometimes they don't. And in the end analysis, the benefits, if you will, the ROI on that isn't always very, if at all. And in some respects, the ability to connect people, to create communities of practice and to share is extremely important. And I know that in your career, you've done that several times, and you've also seen people miss the opportunity. Would you talk a little bit about how that kind of effort can be put together fairly easily, and how we can invest in making sure that it really does provide a return that lasts well beyond when say a technology vendor has installed something?
Well, there's a lot packed in there, and what I would say, again, time is a precious and finite resource, just as your budget is a finite resource, and it's amazing how quickly you can implement the enterprise performance management at the executive team level, and that's where I would start. And it's amazing to watch your team transform as this is being implemented. The understanding that the different team members gain during that process of what other parts of the organization do and how the work that they do themselves impacts that work is fascinating. And as a leader, it's wonderful to watch the light bulbs go on. Just that conversation, and that can be done very quickly these days. You all at Mass Ingenuity have gotten very good at implementing a top level fundamentals map for an executive team. It just builds a cohesion that is hard to describe, and it's hard to put a tangible thing on there. I'm sorry, English is difficult. But the other piece, though, is while that's a wonderful process and gains great insight, it's the tools that you have to put in place to support that understanding. And that's where, something like results software, where you can establish your performance measures, you can establish your major initiatives, and you can monitor them in real time as to how the organization's performing is really, really key. And quite frankly, it'd be, if I was still in that line of work, it'd be a tool I'd be using every morning. That'd be the first thing I'd bring up is what's my calendar? Who am I meeting with? What initiatives are they working on? What are their core measures that they have? Because we're going to have a conversation about that when we get together.
That's interesting. It sounds like when you turn your laptop on, that would be where you start instead of your email.
Yes, absolutely. Well, calendar first, because I want to know who I'm meeting with. And then number two, I'd go into results to see, how things are going. Because quite frankly, if they're doing great, I want to be able to praise them and their team that they're doing great. And if something's not going well, I want to ask the question as to what do they think is going wrong and what resources do they need to get it turned around.
Excellent. Thank you on that very much.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's talk about partnerships, and then specifically talk about EPM partners. Here at Mass Ingenuity, we work hard to ensure that when we show up, that we truly are balancing the people, process, and technology equation, if you will. Making sure that we're focusing on change management, not just the tech, et cetera. And as you know, there are other characteristics that agencies are looking for in partnerships. So what is it about the way we do our work, or for that matter, others do their work, that you find useful, and what things do you find that you actually don't find use in? Because what I'm really looking for here is to explore what the right partnership to ensure success of EPM looks like.
Well, and we had this conversation many years after, of course, but when I first met you, I didn't have a high opinion of consultants in their service to state government. Many times they brought a private sector bias to the work, not understanding the challenges of the public sector. And in addition, I often felt that they just gave me a report about all the things I knew were going wrong beforehand, but they didn't tell me how to solve those problems. And what I really liked about Mass Ingenuity, number one, is the absolute partnership, coming alongside and rolling up the sleeves and working with the executive team to move the organization forward. But not only that, and I was going somewhere with that. Where was I before that? Help me out, Aaron. Sorry, folks. This is what happens when you get as gray as I am. I didn't trust the other consultants, and so I welcomed you with great skepticism, I have to say. And I was very much from Missouri at that point. You needed to show me. And I was pleasantly surprised. And quite frankly, you're one of the few vendors I ever worked with during my very long career in state government that I recommended to others. Matter of fact, you might be the only one that I've recommended to others. So uh, it's you guys morphed as we needed you to morph, and you also told us no, this is the way we got to go because we've done this many times before, and this is how you're going to properly implement enterprise performance management. So it's that balance of meeting us where we needed to be met at, but also keeping us toeing the line properly.
Thank you, Scott. And by the way, two things. One is those of us who were back there at that time, included me, we actually remember that experience, and it was a good challenge. And secondly is, you know, in the spirit of continuous improvement, we've continued to learn all these now 12 years later, and it'll just keep on going because the world's changing and the world of state government's changing. All we can do is make sure we focus on continuous improvement.
Yeah.
Well, Scott, this has been great, and we have some time left over, so let's check and see if we've got some questions from the audience.
We do indeed have a couple of questions that have come through, and I'll encourage everyone to continue them coming while we still are live on the webinar. The first one that's come through, I think this is probably good for both, either of you or both of you, Aaron and Scott. With session, budget cuts, and all around busy schedules among agency leaders, what's the best way for us to get started quickly?
That's a great question. Scott, I'm going to ask you to kick it off just by the nature of the question, and then I'll jump in and add a little bit too.
Well, and we talked about this a little bit earlier about, you know, with your executive team, let's get a fundamentals map built so that there's clear objectives, measurable objectives, clear processes for the organization with clear process measures so that we know that those are performing well. And that document itself becomes very powerful in the legislature. So if you're in a legislative session, I remember the very first time I presented the fundamentals map, and it changed how we presented and talked about the agency in a transformative way, quite frankly. You know, before we would talk about the different divisions within the organization. So we talked about the what, but we didn't talk about what we did. We didn't talk about why it was important. And so I remember that very first conversation with the Ways and Means Committee and talking about, as we said before, we manage the state's assets, we manage the state's risk, we manage the state's personnel system, those kinds of things. It changed the conversation. I remember our biggest critic, Senator Betsy Johnson, you know, I was a little nervous when the chair called on her because I didn't know what I was going to hear, but her words were, that's the best presentation I've ever heard the department give, because it changed how we talked about ourselves. And more importantly, it changed our focus to what our customers were expecting from us. And so if you just want to get through a tough session, if you can get that piece done and then use it as a communication tool, it's very powerful. And there are a number of agencies now in the state of Oregon that basically use their fundamentals map as a presentation document in front of Ways and Means, rather than what I would traditionally call an organizational view of the agency.
Indeed, thank you. I'll add on a little bit to that. We've learned some things over the last decade and plus on how to really react to and be supportive during session. I have to say, we sometimes think that, oh boy, it's a short session and we get all excited. I think net we're not quite sure whether it really matters, whether it's long or short, same kind of principles. So one of the things we've done, of course, is reduce the time necessary to do fundamentals or strategy deployment or all of those things. Plus, we wanted to make sure that the deployment of the software, the tech side, was something that could be done in 5 days or less, quite literally, and that it was simple to learn. 60 minutes and you're up and running really well. 90 minutes if you're an admin and you're administrating really well. Because without having that kind of speed, even if whether it's session or not, it's just tedious and it's not fun doesn't get to results quickly. And after all, what we want is results. That's why it's called results. So one of the things, like I said, we've learned is how to keep cutting off the time to get to a first result so that folks can then have a conversation around the measures, around the projects, and decide what they want to do to improve. So it's all good stuff. Back to you, Kent.
Okay, thanks, guys. The next question that has come in is, when in the process and how are frontline staff engaged in the EPM system?
Great question. Well, Scott, I'm going to ask you again to start that, just because it starts, with what the agency and the staff sees, and then I'll join you with some other ideas as well.
Yeah, and so as we mentioned, we often start with the executive team, but we have to, and we produce the first draft of the fundamentals map, but we have to do that with humility, because we as executives in the organization don't actually do the work. It's our team that does the work. And I think I talked a little bit about before. So what we ended up doing was printing out a giant version of the fundamentals map, and then having a series of town hall meetings with different work units. And we asked folks to find themselves on the fundamentals map, and then also let us know if that terminology isn't the terminology that you use. We wanted to have the common terminology that the frontline folks use, not the ones that we might use up at the executive level. So there was editing done, but more importantly, every employee in our organization, has over 1,200 employees, were able to put a Post-it or a little dot up next to a sub process that said, that's what I do, and that leads to this outcome.
Absolutely. I remember those days and the excitement. Quite honestly, folks didn't believe they were going to be involved. You really changed the paradigm with that. And from that, what we've learned is, in order for us to be effective from a change point of view or a value point of view, or all of them, what we've had to do is get everybody involved quickly. So we encourage the executive team to, first of all, they have to sponsor it correctly, but their participation needs to be visible, and they need to be talking to people right away. Within the first 30 days, staff is involved. Within the first 90 days, heavily involved. And now, once they get past about 90 days, really the concept that used to be thought of as slow cascading, is now sped up into no, we're going to actually move what we know forward and throughout the organization quickly, because after all, the real excitement is having problem solving occur in the front lines, where people actually know what the problems are, and once they're given tools for doing it, can do it very effectively. Now let me pause, because I'd be curious about how you feel about that, Scott.
Well, number one, endorse that 100%. And then number two, I just wanted to add a next step to that, was that we then took the fundamentals map and our strategic initiatives to our customers, and we shared it with them. And because we knew that we had a lot of work to do within our organization, our strategic initiatives were, quite frankly, very inward looking. And it was our customers that said, that's really great, but what about us? And so they asked for two very specific initiatives to have. And so we basically swapped two out and put two in. But the voice of the customer is very important in this process, and taking advantage of that. And again, having a very easy to understand means of communicating with your customers was very powerful, and they appreciated it very much. And that shifted kind of the narrative of, DAS is evil, get rid of them, to, no, they're working with us, they're trying to solve problems with us. Just, give them the time it takes to get it done.
That's great. Thank you for that reminder, because it's so true. Kent, I think we have time for one or two more questions.
Okay, yeah, we've got another one that I think is quite related to the last one, and it's really about, I'm going to try to paraphrase. It's Scott, you spoke about scorecards and outcome measures and utilizing those with as you're communicating with legislature. The question is about leading indicators or process measures and the importance of those. And again, I think it's connected because oftentimes that's where people on the front lines find themselves, right? So question really directly is, talk about the difference between outcome measures and process measures and the importance of each.
Yeah, and I think you said it well. I mean, the process measures are the measuring our daily work. What is it that we do every day in those processes so as to achieve the outcomes? And so it's a much more immediate type of measure. It might be monthly, it might be weekly, it might be every quarter. Whereas the outcome measures move more slowly over time because they're bigger, often for some agencies, societal measures. But there's the opportunity, though, is in the process measures. And as Aaron alluded to, driving problem-solving skills down to the front lines and allowing frontline employees to problem solve, make changes, and improve their processes and their metrics is very, very powerful. And matter of fact, the Department of Arizona Corrections has a wonderful video where a correctional officer too talks about how they're having a problem with basically medical cases in their unit, and how that was a problem for them and how they problem solved it, fixed it themselves, and they didn't have to go to the executive team to fix it. They fixed it themselves. And what I like to say is we create the box that we want people to play in, and within that box, they can make whatever improvements they want to make, as long as they're legal, and go ahead and work on those frontline metrics that they touch every day, because it's their work. Let them make it better. Did I stray, Kent? I can
Nope,
sometimes do
right.
that.
I think that hit at the heart of the question. And one more came in. Well, why don't we make this our last one?
Very good.
Okay. What tips do you have for an organization that is just beginning their EPM journey?
Oh, now that's a great question, because so many people are just beginning the EPM journey. Scott, why don't you kick it off, and I'll wrap cleanup on that.
So a couple things. One, it's hard but rewarding work. So just understand that. Two, you're not going to get it perfect the first time. It's an iterative process. So give yourself permission to, is it 80% good? Yep, let's move on. Because you could iterate forever and talk about what ifs. That's not going to get it implemented. So give yourself permission to say that's 80% good and move on. And then we talked about it many times. You got to communicate with your staff, your team on a regular basis, because in a void of information and communication, they're going to make up the worst story possible of what's going on, and that you're going to try to eliminate 20% of the jobs by implementing this continuous improvement enterprise performance management system.
Indeed. And I think what I would add to it is, don't make any attempt to boil the ocean. Start small. If you are working on fundamentals, the first pass through that is it can be as simple as, what are the 6 things that we do that are most important, and what are the 6 things we do that support it, and what are just a few measures, even 3, that help to explain our processes, and what are a few measures for the outcomes, and then move to having a business review as soon as possible. The reason for that is the first one's going to be a prototype or practice, so will be the second one. But those business reviews, excuse me, are a golden opportunity to actually put into practice the act of using data to tell a story, to make a decision, and to apply problem solving. And the sooner you do it, the sooner it becomes more natural. And frankly, it's really rewarding, because now all of a sudden everybody's involved, as opposed to talking about the theory of it. So additional recommendations for getting started. Well, I think then, Kent, basically that's all the time we have. So any remaining questions, if there are, we'll make sure we respond by email. To all of you who attended, thank you for taking the time to participate. Scott, thank you so much for sharing the experience and being back with us. And with that, good day.
Thank you.